They tried to humiliate a president in public. They didn't know his daughter was watching, and she's not the kind to stay silent. What started as a political ambush quickly unraveled into something far more human and unforgettable. In this gripping undercover boss-style story, a French YouTuber comes face to face with the legacy, pain, and unshakable dignity of one African family, and discovers that the most powerful takedown doesn't always come from behind a microphone. Featuring President Ibrahy Trari and his fearless daughter Aya. This is not just a tale of confrontation. It's about truth, humility, and the moment a critic was forced to see the soul of a nation. Stay until the end. Because some silences are louder than any speech, and one unexpected encounter may just change everything. There are rooms that hum with polite chatter, and then there are rooms that vibrate with something electric. Anticipation, history, the weight of moments about to happen. The grand hall of the presidential palace in Ouagadougou was one of those rooms. Rows of elegant red chairs were arranged with surgical precision beneath soaring ceilings. Stained glass windows cast soft, geometric shadows on the marble floors, and the late afternoon sun poured in, gilding every surface with a dusty gold. The crowd was a rich mosaic. Local leaders in vibrant traditional robes, young entrepreneurs clutching phones and notebooks, and international journalists trying to act unimpressed but constantly scribbling. All eyes were drawn to the stage, under a bold gold-lettered banner. African youth, our present, our future. This wasn't just another government forum. People could feel it. Something was different. And then the side doors opened. A hush swept across the room like a sudden wind. President Ibrahy Trari entered, not flanked by guards or fanfare, but alone, wearing a crisp military uniform and his unmistakable red beret. His stride was slow, deliberate, not hesitant but composed. His expression calm, focused, a kind of stillness that made the noisy world feel quieter in his presence. As he walked toward the podium, applause rippled. Not wild or forced, but deeply respectful. Some in the front row stood. A few young women exchanged whispered remarks, clearly awestruck by the man they considered more than a politician. He was a symbol. When he spoke, his voice was clear but never loud. "Welcome," he said, eyes sweeping the room. "We are here to talk about our future. The future of Africa. The future of our youth." In the back, unnoticed but watching closely, stood a figure whose presence did not belong. He was not here to listen. He had come to provoke. And the president's daughter, watching from a private balcony above, already knew she would not let that go unanswered. His name was Jules Martin, and if he was known for anything, it was for his unapologetic mockery of anything he didn't understand or care to. A French YouTuber with over 2 million subscribers, Jules had built a digital empire out of cynicism. His videos had titles like African Utopia, Think Again, and Why Africa Still Fails. He thrived on provocation, editing footage to stir outrage, masking half-truths with sharp edits and snide voiceovers. It wasn't journalism, it was spectacle. That day he wore his favorite performance outfit, pressed white shirt, beige trousers, a watch that caught the light just enough. His eyes, a cold shade of blue, scanned the room, not with interest but calculation. He had already rehearsed the question he would ask. He had a hook ready. "Make the president squirm," he had told his cameraman Thomas, just before entering. Thomas, bit younger, carried their gear quietly. He didn't like these setups, but Jules paid well and had an eye for viral drama. "We'll hit 1 million views before midnight," Jules whispered, as he adjusted a small tripod at the back of the hall. He watched as President Trari took the stage. Jules wasn't impressed. To him, the uniform, the red beret, the soft-spoken welcome, it was all theater. The perfect backdrop for the takedown he had planned. But what Jules didn't see, what his lens could not capture, was the slow, steady fire kindling in the upper balcony. Aya Trari had seen men like him before, self-declared truth-tellers, foreigners who sold simplified pain for clicks. She watched his every move, her posture still, her eyes unblinking. Her father had faced soldiers, traitors, and warlords. Jules Martin would not be the one to shake him. She leaned forward slightly. If Jules thought he was the only one filming today, he was about to be very wrong. The moment came wrapped in silence. President Traoré had just finished a powerful passage about education and dignity, and the room was still, contemplative. That's when Jules Martin stood up. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't wait to called. He simply rose, letting the silence work for him. His tall frame and European features stood out in the crowd. He adjusted the mic slightly, his white shirt crisp, his tone dripping with performative curiosity. "Mr. President," he began with mock deference, "you speak of hope, of building a better future. But the truth is, young people are leaving. Your country, isn't that the real sign of failure?" Gasps rippled through the hall. An old woman muttered under her breath. A student stood halfway, unsure whether to shout or sit. Jules wasn't done. "Maybe," he added with a smirk, "the problem isn't the youth. Maybe the problem is your leadership, or perhaps the absence of it. Nice speeches don't fill empty stomachs." He delivered that line like a punchline, expecting silence or laughter. What he got instead was a wave of protest. "You don't speak for us," someone shouted. "Respect our president," yelled a young woman near the front. One of the traditional leaders rose, staff in hand, and shook his head slowly at Jules. The crowd was stirring, angered, hurt, loyal. The president's security detail took a half step forward, alert, but Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply lifted his hand, a small signal. The room calmed instantly. He looked directly at Jules, eyes steady. "Mr. Martin," he said in a voice quieter than the shouting but infinitely more powerful. "I know your name. I know your work." He let the silence breathe. "I invite you to meet me after this forum. There are things you cannot see from your tower in Paris. I'd like to show you." The stillness that followed was heavier than any yell, and high above, Aya Traoré's jaw tightened. She knew her father's patience. She also knew what it meant when he decided someone was worth confronting, in silence or in truth. 2 hours later, the grandeur of the palace felt different. No longer a space of applause and cameras, it now echoed with quiet footsteps and the occasional distant hum of a ceiling fan. The hallway leading to the president's private office was long, wide, and polished to a mirror shine. Every step Jules Martin took sounded too loud, too certain, too alone. Thomas followed closely behind, adjusting the settings on his camera, though his face looked more like a man preparing for a funeral than a broadcast. The arrogance Jules had displayed earlier had begun to peel at the edges. His swagger was still there, but his eyes betrayed him, less icy, more unsure. "Are you recording everything?" Jules whispered without turning. Thomas nodded. "Wide shot. Audio's clean." "Good," Jules muttered. "This is the big one." But even he could feel how different it all seemed now. The game was changing, and he wasn't sure he liked the new rules. They passed tall, dark wood doors with golden handles. The walls were lined with portraits, former leaders of Burkina Faso, their eyes rendered in paint but watching nonetheless. A reminder, this was not just a political office, this was a seat of legacy. Jules straightened his collar. Sweat was forming under his shirt. His palms were clammy, but he clenched them into fists. 2 guards stood at the entrance to a grand door at the end of the corridor. One of them knocked gently. A muffled voice inside responded, and the door swung open slowly. "The president is waiting for you," said the guard. Jules stepped in. The office was large but simple. Sunlight from tall windows spilled across a desk, leather chairs, and a wall of dusty books. The air smelled like wood, history, and expectation. At the far end of the room, facing the window, stood President Ibrahy Trari. He didn't turn. He simply said, "Sit down, Mr. Martin. You've already spoken enough. Today, now it's time to listen." and for the first time all day, Jules Martin obeyed. The sound of a soft knock interrupted the heavy silence. Jules turned instinctively as the office door opened again. She entered without hesitation. Aya Trari stepped into the room like a force of nature wrapped in elegance. She wore a fitted, modern version of traditional Burkinabe attire, vibrant patterns in deep blue and gold that contrasted beautifully against her smooth, dark skin. Her hair was braided and pulled into a neat bun, silver earrings catching the late afternoon light. As they moved with her stride, she carried a folder under one arm, an iPad in her hand, and purpose in her walk. "This is Aya Trari," the president said without looking. "My daughter, and one of the voices behind our youth policy." Aya offered no smile. "I know who you are, Mr. Martin," she said, her voice clear, low, and unwavering. "I've seen your videos, I know what you do." Jules straightened, expecting hostility, maybe even a lecture. But what came next was more precise, like a scalpel. "You turn our reality into your entertainment," she said. "You travel through pain and package it for profit, but you never ask why that pain exists, and you never stay long enough to see the people who are fighting it." Without waiting for a reply, she placed a stack of charts and printed photos on the president's desk. Then she swiped on her iPad and projected images and data onto the screen behind him. 60% of our youth don't finish high school," she said. "Unemployment among urban youth? 43%. And yes, some leave. Some join. The wrong fights. But do you ever film the ones who stay? Who teach under trees, who farm without machines, who build tech with no capital?" Her finger moved across the tablet. Pictures appeared. Children studying by candlelight, teenagers repairing solar panels, girls coding on cracked laptops. "These are the faces you erase," Aya said, looking Jules straight in the eye. "Because despair is easier to sell than dignity?" Jules opened his mouth, but no words came. Aya had taken the camera from him, and she was showing him what he had refused to see. The weight of Aya's words didn't just land, they sank deep. Jules sat motionless, the silence stretching between them like a thread about to snap. His tongue, once sharp and ready with sound bites, felt dry and useless. Thomas, still behind, the camera didn't say a word. Even the hum of the AC seemed distant, like the room had slipped into another dimension, one where his rehearsed lines had no place. Aya tapped to the next slide. The image on the screen showed a boy sitting under a flickering streetlight, book spread across his lap. "His name is Samuel," she said. "He walks 3 kilometers every evening to study under that light because his family can't afford electricity. He's 12. He wants to be a doctor." Jules blinked. Then another image. A girl, no older than 15, welding scrap metal into cooking stoves. "This is Aya. She started her own micro-business after taking a free entrepreneurship course. She now employs 2 boys from her neighborhood." Each photo carried weight. Each name defied the narrative he had pushed online. Jules felt something twist inside him. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear. It was shame. Real, unfiltered, inescapable shame. His fingers curled slightly on the armrest. Aya didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply stood there, the silence now heavy with dignity. He looked down at his hands and was startled to see them trembling. Thomas whispered behind the camera, "Jules, this is still streaming." Jules looked up, stunned. The red dot on the camera was blinking. It was live. The confrontation, the data, the emotion, it was all being broadcast in real time to the very audience Jules had once misled. He swallowed hard. Comments were flooding in. Notifications vibrated in his pocket, but none of them mattered right now. He couldn't hide behind the lens. Aya had turned it on him, and the truth for the first time was louder than anything he had ever said. He blinked. Again. His vision blurred. Were those tears? Yes, and he didn't stop them. Because in that moment, Jules Martin was no longer the YouTuber who mocked. He was just a man finally beginning to understand. The silence in the room remained, but it had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was listening. President Trari, who had been silent during Aya's presentation, finally moved. Slowly, he walked to the window, looking out at the city of Ouagadougou as the last light of day faded. Then, without turning, he began to speak. "I got this," he said, lifting a small bronze statue from the corner of his desk. "When I was 16. First prize in mathematics. A gift from my local school in Koudougou. The school had no ceiling fans, no computers, just chalk, wood, and the will to learn." Jules leaned forward slightly, still blinking tears. "My father was a farmer," Trari continued. "He could not read. My mother sold vegetables at the market. I did my homework with a kerosene lamp. It made my eyes burn, but it was the only light I had." He finally turned, holding the statue in one hand. His expression was not one of pity or pride, but memory. "I grew up dreaming of a Burkina where children would not have to squint through smoke to see a future, where we wouldn't be mocked from afar but respected for our efforts, our growth, our hope." Aya, standing by the screen, looked at her father with eyes full of recognition. She had heard this story before, but today she saw it land with new power. President Trari approached Jules, placed the statue gently on the desk between them. "This is not about shame," he said softly. "It's about seeing. And you, Mr. Martin, you've spent years looking, but not really seeing." Jules lowered his eyes. The studio persona was gone. All that was left was a man remembering what it meant to listen. He looked up. "I never thought about it that way," he whispered. "I only wanted to stir things up, get people talking." Trari gave a small nod. "You succeeded. But now, what will you do with that attention?" Outside, the sky was purple. The city glowed below, and for the first time, Jules wondered what it would feel like to tell a story that didn't end in mockery, but in meaning. The stillness in the room deepened, but it no longer carried judgment. It was a space now filled with reflection, and something even rarer, possibility. Jules shifted in his seat, fingers brushing against the edge of the desk where the statue stood. The live stream was still running. His audience had watched his ego unravel in real time, and somehow, he didn't care. Maybe they needed to see it, just as much as he had needed to feel it. President Trari walked back around his desk. From a drawer, he retrieved an envelope sealed with the golden crest of Burkina Faso. He placed it before Jules. "This is not condemnation," he said. "It's an invitation." Jules looked up, confused. "Next week we launch the Future Burkina program, a national initiative to empower youth through education, entrepreneurship, and innovation. We'd like you to document it." Jules blinked. "Me? After everything I've done?" Aya stepped forward now, her arms crossed but her expression softer. "Yes," she said, "because your voice holds power, and because those who've been humbled can sometimes become the strongest allies. Not out of pity, but out of truth." Jules opened the envelope. Inside was an official press badge, a schedule, and a short handwritten note. "You've seen our past. Come witness our future." It was signed simply Ibrahim. His voice cracked slightly. "Why trust me?" Trari's answer came without pause. "Because the moment you let yourself feel what we live, you became more than a critic. You became human," Aya added. "Our continent doesn't need pity, it needs respect and truth. If you can offer that, even imperfectly, then maybe this isn't your fall. Maybe it's your beginning." Jules looked from her to the president, then down at the envelope again. His hands still trembled, but something steadier was beginning to grow beneath them. He nodded slowly. "I'll try." Aya offered the faintest smile. "That's a start." And just like that, the story he thought he came to expose had become one he now belonged to. 3 weeks later, the rainy season had rolled into Ouagadougou like a slow, waking river. The red dust that clung to the city streets had turned into sticky, ochre mud, splashing on the legs of passers-by. But the wet skies brought more than just storms. They brought renewal. Inside the grand auditorium of Joseph Kizerbo University, hundreds gathered for the official launch of the Future Burkina program. Flags flanked the stage. Behind the podium stood a new emblem, a stylized baobab tree whose branches curled into the outline of the nation. Ibrahy Trari, dressed in a charcoal suit instead of his military attire, addressed the crowd with quiet strength. "This is not another promise," he declared, "but a real commitment. To those who stay, to those who build, to those who believe." In the audience, cameras clicked. But one lens wasn't just capturing the moment, it was rediscovering it. Jules Martin stood off to the side, no longer in his crisp white shirt. He wore a local woven tunic, simple and clean. The tripod in front of him held no trap. The lens did not hunt, it listened. Beside him, Thomas worked silently, capturing the enthusiasm in the room, the nods of agreement, the hands scribbling notes. The young girl in the front row whose eyes sparkled with something Jules finally recognized as hope. This footage would not be chopped for drama, would not be shaded for cynicism. It would be shared in full, with context, with care. Aya passed him in the aisle, her glance brief but meaningful. She saw him, not as a threat, not even as a guest, but as a man who had chosen to see differently. As the crowd rose in applause, Jules kept filming, but this time he didn't frame the story. He followed it, and for the first time in years, it felt like the story was leading somewhere real. That night, the rain finally stopped. The sky over Ouagadougou cleared, revealing stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. In the quiet garden behind the presidential palace, the air smelled of wet earth and hibiscus. Jules Martin stood, alone near a stone bench, camera bag at his feet, eyes turned upward. He hadn't posted anything yet. The footage sat in his hard drive, untouched. Not because he was unsure, but because for the first time, he didn't feel the urge to rush. He was thinking, reflecting, listening to the quiet. Thomas had gone to bed early. Aya was somewhere inside, likely still working. President Trari had already said goodnight, leaving Jules with a simple, unspoken message. "The rest is yours." Jules reached into his bag and pulled out the statue, Trari's math prize from his youth. The president had handed it to him after the ceremony, without a word. It wasn't a gift, it was a reminder. He turned it in his hands under the moonlight. He thought about the boy studying under a flickering light, about Aisha welding stoves, about Samuel walking miles just to dream of something better. He thought about the eyes of the girl in the front row, hopeful, unbroken. And then he thought of his own audience, the ones who had followed him for shock, for drama, for controversy. They were still watching, still waiting. What if, this time, he gave them something else? A story not built on conflict but on courage, not about what was broken, but what was being built. He turned his camera on, pointed it toward the garden, the lights of the palace faint in the background. He adjusted the frame, paused and pressed record. Then slowly, gently, he set the camera down. No narration, just silence, just stars. Just the image of a man who had once come to shame a country, and now couldn't stop falling in love with its truth. And somewhere in the palace behind him, Aya smiled without looking, because she knew this was the last shot of one story, and the quiet beginning of another. He came to shame them. They offered him an invitation. He expected weakness. He found wisdom. And as millions watched him fall apart live on his own stream, something rare happened. The internet didn't cancel him. It witnessed his transformation. Aya didn't destroy him. She showed him what he'd never seen. President Trari didn't raise his voice. He handed over the truth, and Jules Martin, the man who mocked, became the man who listened. If this story stirred something in you, don't. Just scroll away. Share it. Because dignity is not a headline, it's a choice. Every day, everywhere. Let this be the moment we look again, not just at others, but at ourselves. Comment your thoughts. Share it with someone who still believes people can change. Subscribe for more stories that matter, because maybe the real revolution starts with listening.